So Keir Starmer won a landslide election less than 2 years ago, with Labour dominating the northwest of England, sweeping up seats across Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, and Cheshire like they were collecting Pokémon cards. And now those same MPs are reportedly about to vote against his government's funding plans because they're terrified Reform UK is going to take their seats at the next election. That's not just a political headache, that's a full-blown nightmare where your own team is preparing to stab you in the front because you're not giving them enough money to defend themselves against Nigel Farage. Welcome to UK Political Insight, where we watch Labour's coalition fracture in real time, and today we're diving into why North West MPs are furious about funding, what this 3-year settlement actually means, and whether Starmer is about to face the kind of internal rebellion that makes governing impossible. Spoiler alert, when your own MPs are publicly saying they might vote against government policy because reform is breathing down their necks, you've got a serious problem that goes way beyond normal parliamentary grumbling. Right, let's start with the basics, because this is about money, power, and political survival, which is basically politics distilled to its purest form. The government is working on a 3-year settlement for local authority funding. This determines how much money councils across England get to provide services like libraries, social care, children's services, street cleaning, all the stuff that makes communities actually function. It's not glamorous, but it's the foundation of how local government operates. Now, North West MPs are reportedly furious because they believe this funding settlement unfairly penalizes northern towns. They're not just mildly concerned or politely raising objections through proper channels. They've written letters to Steve Reed, the local government secretary, and they're threatening to vote against the government's own funding strategy. When your own MPs are preparing to rebel over budget allocations, that's a sign the coalition that got you elected is starting to crack. Representatives from the Liverpool City region have written to Reed claiming the current plans are unfair to northern towns. And separately, Steve Rotherham, the mayor of the Liverpool City region, has sent his own letter saying more cash needs to go to Wigan, Warrington, and St. Helens. So this isn't just backbench grumbling. This is coordinated pressure from multiple sources, all making the same argument. The Northwest isn't getting enough money, and it's going to cost Labour seats. One anonymous MP told The Guardian, and I'm quoting because this is important, "This is causing a lot of angst among Northwestern MPs, a lot of whom are facing a challenge from Reform UK at the next election, and need their constituents to be able to feel the effect of the investment the government is putting in." Let's unpack that sentence because there's a lot there. First, a lot of angst is politician speak for people are absolutely fuming. Second, they're explicitly connecting this to Reform UK challenges. Third, they're saying constituents need to feel the effect of investment, which means currently they're not feeling it. This is the political reality check that every government faces eventually. You can announce billions in spending, you can issue press releases about record investment, you can talk about leveling up and transforming communities. But if people in constituencies don't actually see or feel the results of that spending, none of it matters politically. And if Reform UK can point to closed libraries, degraded services, and cuts to local budgets while saying, see, Labour doesn't care about you either, that's a winning message in places that already feel abandoned by Westminster. Jim McMahon, the MP for Oldham West, and someone who's been mentioned in previous coverage as part of the Manchester Mafia potentially backing Andy Burnham, told The Guardian something even more revealing. He said, "Everybody accepts that the government has done a significant amount to stabilize local government and reflect that deprivation is a driver of cost and need." That's the diplomatic part, where he acknowledges the government has done something. But then comes the criticism. Where MPs see there's a gap is when they go back to their local authorities, who are taking budgets to council that will see more cuts, as rocketing demand for children's services, adult social care, and temporary accommodation are still eating into budgets. So even though the government claims to be increasing funding, councils are still facing cuts because demand for services is rising faster than the money to pay for them. It's like getting a raise that's smaller than inflation. Technically, you got more money, but in real terms, you're worse off. This is the brutal arithmetic of local government finance. Children's services costs are exploding because more kids need support. Adult social care costs are soaring because the population is aging and people need care. And temporary accommodation costs are rocketing because housing is unaffordable and homelessness is rising. And all of these are demand-led services, meaning councils legally have to provide them. So if those costs are rising faster than funding increases, councils have to cut everything else to balance the budget. That means libraries close, youth services disappear, street cleaning reduces, all the discretionary stuff that makes communities feel supported gets sacrificed to pay for the statutory obligations. The government's response is to point to big numbers. They've highlighted that almost £78 billion has been made available to England's councils this year. That's a lot of money, like genuinely a massive amount. And they've changed the funding system so that the poorest communities supposedly benefit more. By the end of the multi-year period, officials say ministers will have provided a 15.1% cash terms increase for local authorities in England. Steve Reed said in December, this is a chance to turn the page on a decade of cuts and for local leaders to invest in getting back what has been lost, to bring back libraries, youth services, clean streets, and community hubs. Today, we're making sure every community has the funding they need to succeed. That's the government line. We're investing, we're fixing what the Conservatives broke, we're giving communities what they need. But here's the problem. A 15.1% increase in cash terms sounds good until you account for inflation and rising demand. If inflation has been running at around 4 to 5% annually and demand for services is rising at similar or higher rates, then a 15% increase over 3 years might not even maintain current service levels, let alone allow for restoration of what was cut. It's the classic government trick of announcing big percentage increases that sound impressive but don't actually keep pace with real-world costs. And North West MPs are calling bullshit on this because they're the ones who have to go back to their constituencies and explain why the library is still closed, why youth services are still cut, why the streets are still dirty despite Labour being in power and claiming to invest in communities. They can wave around government press releases all they want, but if their councils are still cutting budgets, those press releases are worthless. The Reform UK threat is what makes this politically explosive rather than just another funding dispute. In a normal political environment, Labour MPs in the North West would be safe. These are traditionally Labour areas. They should be rock-solid seats. But Reform is targeting exactly these communities with a message of the establishment has abandoned you. Both parties have failed you. We're the only ones who actually care about working-class communities. And if Labour-run councils are cutting services despite Labour being in power, that message becomes very persuasive. The fact that MPs are explicitly saying they're worried about losing to Reform shows how seriously they're taking this threat. This isn't abstract concern about opinion polls. This is MPs looking at their majorities, looking at Reform's polling in their areas, and calculating that they could genuinely lose their seats if they can't show their constituents that Labour government makes a material difference to their lives. And the threat to vote against the government's own funding strategy is the nuclear option in parliamentary terms. Government MPs are supposed to support government policy. That's how parliamentary majorities work. When your own MPs are openly discussing voting against you, it means either they're so desperate they're willing to risk party discipline, or they've calculated that voting with their constituents against the government is politically safer than voting with the government against their constituents. This also reveals deeper tensions about regional inequality that Labour was supposed to fix. The whole pitch was that Labour would level up the country properly, not like the Conservatives' empty promises. They'd invest in the North and the Midlands and communities that have been left behind. They'd reduce regional inequality. They'd make sure London and the South East England didn't get all the resources while everywhere else struggled. But if North West MPs are writing letters claiming funding plans unfairly penalize northern towns, that suggests the old pattern of regional inequality is continuing under Labour, and that's politically toxic for a party that won these seats by promising to be different, to actually deliver for working-class communities outside London and the southeast. The specific mention of Liverpool City region is also significant because this was a Labour heartland.
Merseyside has been red for generations. If Labour MPs from Liverpool are threatening to rebel over funding, that's not fringe discontent, that's core support feeling abandoned. And the fact that the mayor is separately lobbying for more cash for Wigan, Warrington, and St. Helens shows this isn't just backbench grumbling. This is coordinated pressure from multiple sources, all making the same argument. The North West isn't getting enough money, and it's going to cost Labour seats. The 3-year settlement structure is also interesting because it's meant to provide stability and allow councils to plan long-term rather than scrambling year to year. That's theoretically good governance, but it also means if you get the funding formula wrong, councils and communities are locked into that inadequacy for 3 years. They can't come back next year asking for more. They're stuck with whatever settlement is agreed now. So the stakes for North West MPs are high. If they accept this settlement and it proves inadequate, they'll spend the next 3 years watching services cut, constituents getting angrier, and reform getting stronger, with no opportunity to fix the funding until after the next election. If they vote against the settlement, they risk party discipline and looking disloyal to their own government. But they might be able to force changes that give their areas more money and give them something tangible to defend.